Viola Manville was just this charming woman full of energy.
She was bludgeoned to death.
Shot twice with a BB gun.
I've been prosecuting murderers for 15 years.
This was as bad as I'd ever seen.
And I've never lost a homicide case.
It tormented Viola Manville's family.
My job is to fight for justice.
You have a guy on video confessing to the crime that was like, he's guilty.
He would never do anything like that.
I've been defending the accused for over 20 years.
That's the guy. Let us prove it. And the district attorney's office said no.
Ensuring the innocent don't serve time for someone else's crime.
Not guilty.
For true justice to be served,
We need to answer one single question.
Fall in Western New York is about the prettiest time of year, from the changing of the leaves to apple picking. For small villages like Hilton, it's cause for celebration.
Hilton is a sleepy little town, and everybody knows everybody.
Hilton really is the kind of place where you can leave your door unlocked. It's that sort of a little village type setting.
The worst crime we have here is kids stealing apples.
However, a few days after Thanksgiving 1988, everything changes. That's when a local man, out duck hunting on a quiet stretch of disused railroad, stumbles on a gruesome sight.
She was just bludgeoned to death, beaten terribly, all around her head and her upper body. This was as bad as I'd ever seen.
She had been shot twice with a BB gun. There was a BB gun in the immediate area and a piece of a railroad tie.
The victim is 74-year-old Viola Manville. As the terrible news sinks in, the question on everyone's lips: why would anyone murder the popular and friendly grandmother?
Viola Manville was just this vivacious, charming woman full of energy, spunky.
She was a lovely lady. Everyone just said good things about her.
She was well known in the town of Hilton because people would see her out on a regular basis.
And she walked every day. That was the sad part of this, is just something that she loved to do. Ended up being her death.
Things like this didn't happen in the town of Hilton. So there was a great police investigation, and they scooped up everything that might possibly be evidence.
it's hard to imagine the terror Viola endured at the hands of her assailant. There are clear signs it's a sex attack, the work of a deviant who knows enough to conceal his dark side. And what makes his actions even more frightening is if he's not caught, we'll probably be dealing with more victims.
With the killer on the loose, fear sweeps through the community. Rumor and speculation run riot, galvanizing police into action.
The crime had received so much publicity and was really so notorious that almost every detective in the sheriff's department participated in the investigation. They started checking in the area to find out if anyone knew anything or if anyone had heard anything.
Detectives begin with Viola's ex, maintenance man George Meisner. The two separated a few weeks earlier, a breakup George admits to having trouble dealing with. While questioning him, investigators take a sample of his hair.
One of the items of evidence was a hair that had been on Viola Manville's body. The technology revealed that the hair was not related to anyone with respect to the crime.
George Meisner is cleared.
One of the surprising things about the case was that a number of the young people were bragging about having committed the crime.
The rumor mill keeps swirling around one kid in particular, local delinquent, 16-year-old Mark Christie.
There were a couple of residents in the town of Hilton who volunteered to police officers, you might want to look at Mark Christie. I think he's a violent, kind of weird guy.
He was violent, rude. He was abusive to people, verbally, physically, and even, to animals.
One Hilton resident remembers Mark well.
Hey, give me that.
Mark is a very damaged boy.
Sharon Adam ran a drop-in center for troubled teens in the town. Mark was a regular.
What did you just say?
Mark.
Most of the kids are very uncomfortable while he was there.
Whatever.
They told me that he always carried a knife and he was always threatening them.
By all means, check him out. That's the job of an investigator. But keep in mind that being a little weird is kind of a teenage thing. The truth is, he's a kid. Could he really be responsible for an act this brutal?
This teenager isn't eccentric. He's a time bomb. He blows up cats. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to know that kids who torture animals often move on to hurting people. So yes, in this case, Mark Christie could be responsible, and the police have to treat him as a legitimate suspect.
And that's exactly what lead detective James Stenklick sets out to do.
Police officers spoke to Mr. Christie briefly.
You can verify you were in school here on the 29th for me now.
Yeah, I was in school.
Stenslick also talked to a guard at the high school.
He was here on that day, the 29th?
Yeah, he was here.
So Christie's cleared.
With Christie out of the picture, detectives are under the gun to find another viable suspect. And while digging in police records for anyone with links to Viola Manville, it doesn't take long for them to hit pay dirt. In the shape of local sex offender, Glenn Sterling.
2 years earlier, Glenn had attempted to assault Viola Manville and had pled guilty to that.
That's not all. Chillingly, Viola's dead body is found at the exact same spot where Glenn tried to rape her 2 years before.
Is it just a coincidence that this guy has the same history with Viola Manville? Investigators can't ignore that kind of thing. Revenge is a powerful motive.
Glenn Sterling has every reason to want Viola dead, but it can't be him. He's still behind bars serving out his sentence. However, his younger brother Frank isn't, and that makes him a prime suspect. For the past 4 days, the small western New York village of Hilton has been reeling. The murder of popular grandmother Viola Manville has hit everyone hard. But when they learn police think local resident Frank Sterling is responsible, it compounds the shock.
Frank Sterling was a loner, not well socialized, eager to please. One of his nicknames in high school was Bug Chow, because if you gave him $1, he would eat a bug. He's a moldable, suggestible guy.
He might seem benign, but the one person in town who has reason to passionately resent Viola Manville? Well, that's Frank Sterling, because Viola's the woman who sent his big brother to prison.
Hold on there. One thing good about a small town is that it's not hard to figure out who you're dealing with. And unlike his brother, Frank has no criminal record. He has no history of violence. He's eccentric, yes, but he's also the school bus driver, which means people trust him. If cops want to pin this on him, they'll need to find some real evidence first.
The first task for detectives? Find out exactly where Frank Sterling was when Viola was killed.
Everyone knew that Mrs. Manville took her walk at like 7:30 every morning. So the operating assumption was clear that this murder occurred sometime early in the morning.
Frank was a school bus driver at that time. So that typical day for him would start about 6 o'clock in the morning when he was picked up, and it would go until about 10.
Detectives went to his place of employment and they got his time records. And they talked to the supervising bus driver, who affirmed that yes, he was on the bus that morning. After he got home from work, he had watched cartoons on TV. Investigators went to the television station and checked to see whether those shows were on at that time and what the plots of those shows were. And he was correct in his description of that. After he had come home, he had baked a cake. And he then had to go to the store to get frosting. But they were out of the maple frosting that he wanted. They only had rainbow frosting. So the sheriff's deputies actually went to the store and determined that yes, the store had been out of maple frosting, and they did have rainbow frosting.
Detective Stenklick and his team have a problem. Revenge might have motivated this murder, but when would Frank Sterling have had the opportunity?
This new information not only seems to clear Frank Sterling, but it also means the investigation is in danger of stalling. The precious few leads detectives scraped up have come up empty, leaving them with no viable suspects in a town that's clamoring for answers.
People were very, very frightened that there was a killer still at loose.
Mrs. Manville's family got very involved in trying to help the police, putting up posters. They wanted to make sure that there was no stone unturned.
Still, the police operation goes nowhere. As weeks turn to months and months turn into years, they get no closer to seeing justice served.
The nature of the crime and the sense of loss was something that tormented Viola Manville's family.
Now facing mounting outrage from a terrified community, the county sheriff kickstarts a case review, headed up by an ambitious young detective.
Patrick Crowe was a young up-and-comer, fairly confident in his own abilities. So he had all the tools, certainly in his view, to be able to solve this case. Investigator Crowe and his partner, Thomas Vasile, began reinvestigating the case right from the beginning.
They revisit the crime scene evidence, look again at the witness statements, and come to one inescapable conclusion. Everything points to one man. The only suspect with a viable motive for murder, Frank Sterling.
Frank Sterling's our guy.
I think that the police had definitely suspected Frank from the beginning because they called it a grudge killing.
It's It's not long before the cold case team decides to put him under surveillance.
By this point, Frank had become an over-the-road trucker. He had just returned from about 36 hours on the road. He hadn't slept in a good long time.
There he is. Let's go get him.
It was 6 o'clock in the evening, and they chose that time to come and pull into his driveway, say, Frank, we're re-interviewing everyone.
Appreciate it, Frank.
That means they need to bring Frank back to their office, because this time, they want him to get strapped in and take a lie detector test.
Well, we see that you never took a polygraph. It's like, oh, okay, I'll take a polygraph. They hook up leads, one on the fingertip, and one for the blood pressure. I was nervous and didn't accidentally say something that would incriminate myself.
They ask Frank a bunch of innocuous questions.
Is your name Frank Sterling?
Yes.
Are you 19 years of age?
No.
And then get down to business.
Frank, I want you to imagine you're walking the railroad tracks. Do you see yourself there?
Yes.
Do you see Viola Manville?
Yes.
Sensing a breakthrough, Frank's interrogator cuts to the chase.
He says, here comes Ms. Manville now. What do you do?
Did you kill Viola Manville?
No.
With that, the interrogator says he has what he needs. Frank passes the polygraph. But that's not what they tell him.
I was so frustrated, confused, so tired I didn't even realize the consequences of what it was saying to me.
What's going on here? In pursuit of a confession, they're legally allowed to say just about anything. It doesn't have to be true. They tell Frank he failed the lie detector. Why? To play with his head, to get him rattled and stressed.
You're gonna be in for a long night.
Certain Frank's lying, but sly enough to beat the polygraph, detectives take a softly approach in an attempt to winkle out the truth.
Frank, I understand this is going to be difficult.
It's all right, Frank. I understand.
They showed me the pictures of the crime scene. Okay, does this help refresh your memory? It touched me emotionally. I got upset and threw my lighter, and it's like, oh, Frank, we're on your side. You know, calm down, we're on your side. We're here to help you.
Under pressure, Frank reveals crucial information.
Can you remember what she was wearing?
Purple top, a ski jacket, or dark slacks.
Why is this admission so important? Because certain details have never been made public. When someone knows something about a crime that isn't common knowledge or that hasn't been released, you've got something. How do they know it? There's a good chance they were there.
This is a game changer. Frank has revealed he was almost certainly at the scene of the crime. Can it only be a matter of time before he confesses to the murder of Viola Manville?
I'll go get the camera. Yeah, do that. Okay, see you in there.
Convinced he's about to confess, they set up a video camera and press record.
Okay, Frank, you agreed to talk with us in front of the video
Yes.
camera and make this video?
Yes.
Okay, and that's strictly voluntarily on your part? Okay. Okay, we're gonna ask you.
Taped confessions work powerfully with juries because they're not just being told by someone else what the suspect said. They're looking into the face of the accused saying, yes, I robbed her, I raped her, I killed her, and this is how. What reasonable doubt could there be after that?
The two officers are on each side of him, and Frank is sort of slouched down in the middle. You know, they gave him a box of donuts and they gave him coffee.
And it's okay.
No, so my brother was wrongfully imprisoned.
Frank makes this statement that he was upset with Ms. Manville because his brother was not going to be home for the holidays, and that sort of triggered this anger in him.
Frank, as best as you can remember, and I know this is difficult for you, okay? Did something happen with that BB gun?
Yeah, I started hitting with her.
What else happened, Frank?
Fired shots.
So yeah, I did it. Beat her with the BB gun. What'd you do with the BB gun? I threw it.
In a rage, did you take her pants off?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't hear you.
Yes.
About 2:30 in the morning, that's when I finally said, fine. I did it.
In those 3 short words, I did it, the 2-year-old mystery of who killed Viola Manville is solved. Frank Sterling is charged with her murder, allowing the village of Hilton to finally exhale. All except one person, Sharon Adam, who knows Frank from the days she ran a drop-in for delinquent teens.
I was watching the news that night, and it came on that Frank had been arrested for murder of Viola Manville, and that he had confessed.
Oh my God. Poor Frank.
You have got to be kidding. You people don't know Frank. He would never do anything like that.
You have a guy that the police say confessed to the crime, and you have him on video confessing to the crime. It was like he's guilty.
Convinced it's false, Frank's lawyer attempts to get the confession thrown out, and not just because he recants.
I made a motion to suppress the confession on the grounds that it was the product of hypnosis. In the United States, a police officer can lie and trick a defendant into confessing, but a statement that's the product of hypnosis is not admissible.
The judge says no and throws out the motion. The detectives are not trained hypnotists.
I was one of those, like many in this town, who said, oh, this guy says he fell into some sort of semi-hypnotic state or something. That's the most bogus thing I've ever heard.
Hypnosis? That was a long shot. You can't blame them for trying. It's their job to do whatever they legally can do to keep the jury from ever seeing that confession.
A year after being charged with Viola's murder, Frank Sterling's trial opens amid a media feeding frenzy.
Did you kill Viola Manville?
Central to the prosecution case is Frank's motive, vengeance, and confession.
Let me tell you, trials are filled with surprises, but if you have an admission on camera beforehand, you've mitigated a lot of them.
I know it sounds logical. You confess, you must be guilty. But exactly what happened here? Frank Sterling cracked. It's happened before. Innocent people confessing to crimes just to make their interrogations stop.
On day 1, jurors get to see the damning tape.
Did you get mad at her again?
Yes.
Did you start hitting her again?
Yes.
Okay. Did something happen with that BB gun?
Yeah, I started hitting with her.
What else happened, Frank?
Fired shots.
The effect is electrifying.
I tried to convince the jury that there was no other evidence other than the confession to corroborate it or to show that Frank had done it.
He's tired.
I was hoping that that would be enough.
is confessing because he's under duress.
But it really didn't make any difference when you have bloody, gory, horrible pictures, particularly with an elderly victim. It strikes at the core of everyone's fears. I just sat and watched the jurors watching the videotape. You don't need words to know what they're thinking.
In a rage, did you take her pants off?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't hear you.
Yes.
To a jury, it's simple. Confessions are made by the guilty. An innocent person would never confess to something they didn't do.
You went home and watched TV after. Yes. Okay.
You have no idea if there's a word of truth in it. But a jury that sees Frank confess might not hear you when you show them proof that your client was seen driving a school bus at the time of the crime.
Frank's lawyers launch his defense. The way they present it, he's a victim of police manipulation and downright deceit.
During the polygraph, Mark Sennett asked Frank Sterling, was the victim shot with a BB gun in the foot, in the body, in the arm? The idea is, if you were the shooter, you know where the person was shot, and the polygraph is going to spike. Well, there was no response from Frank Sterling. He passed.
After 3 weeks of listening to the wildly conflicting evidence, the jury is sent out to consider their verdict. It's no slam dunk. It takes them a full 2 days to decide whether Frank Sterling is guilty or innocent.
The jury was out for a long time. I'm sure there were some people in there who had serious, serious doubts.
How do you find the defendant?
Guilty, Your Honor.
I didn't know what to feel. I was angry, confused.
He looked scared, very scared, and I was scared for him. The sentence was passed 25 to life.
If you wanted to write a book about how to wrangle a false confession out of someone, you could start with this tape. They fill his brain with images of the crime and then wheedle and browbeat him into parroting them back. Unfortunately for Frank, he couldn't stand up to that.
That's a serious accusation. If true, the real criminal will still roam the streets. That's not what a good investigation is after. You have to give the benefit of the doubt that things were done right. If they weren't, then show me the proof.
With Frank Sterling safely behind bars, Viola Manville's family can begin to rebuild their lives, and Hilton gradually heal the wounds. But 2 years later, another tragedy rips the town apart, a tragedy that also turns the Viola Manville case on its head.
It was one of the most heartrending cases in the history of this community. Kellyanne Polton went out on her bicycle one evening and disappeared.
Two years have passed since local recluse Frank Sterling was convicted for killing a much-loved grandmother, Viola Manville. But like many behind bars, he claims it's a crime he didn't commit. As for sleepy Hilton, New York, life is slowly getting back to normal when tragedy strikes them once again. Little Kaylee Ann Polton has gone missing.
She's just this adorable 4-year-old blonde-headed girl. I mean, just as cute as could be. And there were reports of her being spotted all over the place. The news coverage of it was just non-stop, really weeks and months on end.
For the parents in the community, it's gut-wrenching.
Come on, kids. We have to go.
They started watching their children probably more than they had, locking their doors. They had posters around, and I asked for one. I was living on Main Street in Hilton, and I put it in the window.
Detectives are stumped. They have no idea whether she's alive or dead. 2 years go by, and they appear no closer to learning the truth. Until, from nowhere, a break.
This guy gets into a little brouhaha with his wife and makes a statement that indicates to his wife that he actually was responsible for Kaylee's killing.
It's Dr. Crow speaking.
Police get a call from newlywed Michelle Christie. Michelle reveals her husband of 4 weeks says he killed Kaylee Ann. Her husband's name? Mark Christie.
Remember Mark? He was the weird teen who liked torturing kittens. He was also an early suspect in the Viola Manville case. If you were investigating the Kaylee Ann case, now would be the time you start giving that Manville case a second look.
The Manville case is solved. If new evidence is recovered to dispute the facts of that case, fine. But until that happens, the focus has to be solely on getting justice for Kaylee Ann.
With no physical evidence linking Mark Christie to Kaylee Ann, the only way of finding out the truth will be to get him to confess.
Christie is an interesting, psychotic person. In the sense that he's very, very smart, he's very, very diabolical. The officer, to his credit, he clues into Christie's psychology.
He's basically took Christie to a restaurant and over a meal of chicken parmesan, managed to get Christie to talk.
He's dying to let everyone know just how smart he was and how he was able to get away with murder.
It's a chilling story. He kills Kaylee Ann and takes her to the factory where he works as a security guard. There, he hid her body in a 30,000-gallon water tank.
It's a body.
I remember that night well because we got wind that Kaylee may have been found. We were at the office, and I think it was like early hours of the morning before we finally got confirmed it was her body.
Craig is only now coming around to the idea that the conviction of Frank Sterling might be a miscarriage of justice.
I knew that Gary Craig was a really straight-up, honest guy who got the facts straight. And that's all you really can ask for in a reporter, is that they get it accurate. And he would always ask me about the case, and I would tell him, I said, Gary, you know, this is an innocent man wrongly convicted. Where I failed with judges and DAs and jurors, I didn't really fail with Gary. He was open-minded enough to think, you know, maybe there is something here.
People like to malign defense attorneys, but most of the defense attorneys I know, when they tell you, I don't think this guy did it, they mean it. Tom Cadera clearly believed as deeply as you could believe that Frank Sterling didn't do it.
Across town, defense lawyer Tom Cadera gets a call that promises to change everything with the Viola Manville case.
It was in the middle of the night, about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, is what I remember.
Hello?
Yeah, Tom.
Oh, yeah, Gary, what's up? And he goes, and he just says to me, guess who they just arrested for killing Kaylee Polton? And I just immediately yelled out to him, I told you Christie did it.
Okay, I'll be in town in the next couple days in the chat.
And I started telling him, you know, I'm gonna get this case reopened, we're gonna finally get Frank out, you know.
Mark Christie is brought to trial at Monroe County Court. he pleads guilty to the murder of Kaylee Polton.
How do you plead?
Guilty.
And sentenced to 25 years to life.
This certainly throws the conviction of Frank Sterling into a new light now, doesn't it? Frank Sterling was the focus, mostly because Mark Christie was ruled out early on. Frank's got a shot at proving his innocence. It starts with looking for proof that Christie's alibi is not as solid as detectives believed.
That's when we went to the high school, got his attendance record, and saw that Christie, was not there that morning. It was marked clearly on his attendance record that he showed up at noon.
But he wasn't here.
When we find that Mark Christie is not in school on the morning of the murder, this is the smoking gun we're looking for.
The defense has found some interesting stuff, but it proves nothing, at least not yet. Mark Christie isn't saying he did it, and all the defense has come up with is that he's a bad guy and that he could have committed the crime. You need much more than that to convince a judge to free a convicted killer.
By now, Frank's case has attracted major interest. High-flying lawyer Don Thompson joins the defense team and starts unpicking the evidence ranged against their client.
I've never seen an interrogation before or since that looked anything like this.
In a rage, did you take her pants off?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't hear you.
Yes.
People do confess to crimes they didn't commit. They do it for all kinds of reasons. The biggest ones: fatigue, exhaustion, and despair. All three can be seen in Frank Sterling's face on that tape.
When I saw the video, I thought it was weird. If Frank Sterling is voluntarily describing how he's involved in this crime, what's all this other stuff going on? Why all the touching?
What the jury is never told is that Sterling is interrogated for a full 12 hours before the video camera is switched on. He's exhausted, at the end of the rope. Detectives play him like a violin.
I just don't see police officers caressing the back and holding the hand and whispering in the ear of the suspects that I represent. This was sort of beyond the pale.
Kept rubbing my shoulders, my back.
Thank you, Frank. It's okay.
Trying to keep me as calm and relaxed as possible. Basically put me into a hypnotic state. That I was not in the right state of mind. Basically just give them what I felt they wanted.
Frank's lawyers call for a retrial.
I thought this was a slam dunk that this case would be reopened.
Prosecution had seen this.
We were able to put together a motion to the court, basically to say, Judge, here is newly discovered evidence that the jury never heard, that would have made a difference in the outcome of the trial. The judge ultimately determined that that information was not a sufficient ground to vacate Frank Sterling's conviction, and denied our motion, and Frank continued serving his sentence.
For the next 8 years, Frank rots in jail.
Why give up hope? Nobody wants to listen to the truth. I'm just gonna die in prison.
For 16 years now, Frank has maintained his innocence. And finally, the new science of genetic fingerprinting has come of age. Now it offers a genuine opportunity to reveal whether Frank Sterling is telling the truth.
We went to court with a motion seeking DNA testing to compare the crime scene evidence and Frank Sterling's DNA and Mark Christie's DNA. This was a case where we were pointing at somebody in particular and saying, that's the guy, let us prove it.
Frank's defense team is convinced the motion will get passed, and their client will soon be walking out the prison's gates.
The district attorney's office said no. I was livid and I was frustrated.
It's really at that point that the criminal justice system just fell apart as far as Frank Sterling is concerned.
This ruling is outrageous. What's to be lost by running that test? If the DNA matches Frank's, the appeals are over. No one can question the verdict. But if you've got the wrong guy, wouldn't you want to know? One test will either prove you right or overturn an injustice. Just do it.
If it was my decision, I'd say go ahead. But I understand why they ruled the way they did. The case is over. Don't forget, Frank Sterling confessed. Every inmate in the state is filing stacks of writs and petitions. At a certain point you say, unless you have actual proof, enough already.
Frank's appeal has nowhere else to go. It looks like he'll spend the rest of his days behind bars.
It was a rough, humiliated, developed the mindset, okay, I'll spend the rest of my life in here. Didn't know if I was ever gonna see the light of day again outside of the prison walls. It really destroyed me.
Until, that is, in a surprise move, Mark Christie himself steps up.
I don't think he's the kind of guy that has any remorse for anything he's done. He wanted to keep investigators somehow rattled.
Christie damns the consequences and agrees to let Frank's defense team take a saliva swab. Even though the courts ruled he is under no obligation to do so.
Thanks, Mark.
So then we were able to do real live DNA testing to try to come up with a profile that was sufficient to compare against both Mr. Sterling and Mr. Christie.
The results of these tests will finally put an end to all who question the guilty verdict. Did Frank Sterling murder Viola Manville? For 18 years, Frank Sterling's been in the slammer for a murder he claims he falsely confessed to committing: the cruel slaying of 74-year-old Viola Manville. In a final roll of the dice, his defense team anxiously awaits the results of DNA tests that could see him walk free.
Those results are pretty darn positive. Mark Christie's DNA is present on the victim's clothing. So Frank Sterling could not have committed this crime.
As a defense lawyer, this is what you dream about. Irrefutable proof that someone else committed the crime that your client's been accused of. The only thing that could be better would be for that someone else to admit he did it.
It's worth a shot. Frank's lawyers reach out to Mark Christie. A confession from Christie will guarantee Frank walks.
We got Richard Byington from Reed & Associates, which is the organization that basically teaches every law enforcement officer in the country how to interrogate witnesses. They went armed with the DNA results so that they could confront Mr. Christie with those results.
The trouble is, Christie's not the kind of guy to give away something for nothing. He wants to play mind games.
This is a guy who kills wantonly and then gets away with it, beats the cops, and then needs everyone to know that he did that.
Christie says, well, why don't you tell me how I did it?
Come on, you're a smart guy. Use your imagination.
You maybe beat her to death with a BB gun. Mr. Christie said, no, it wasn't a BB gun. You know, you've seen the autopsy pictures. A BB gun, a little plastic gun, can't do that kind of damage. A railroad tie? Christie said, don't be an idiot. You know how much those things weigh? How about like part of a railroad tie? And Christie says, that's it.
Satisfied that he's proven how smart he is, Christie admits his guilt.
He describes how he beat Viola Manville to death with a piece of a railroad tie. He describes why he undressed her. He figured she'd die quicker from exposure if he took her clothes off, because she wasn't dead when he left.
That's how I did it.
Totally unaware of what's been happening behind the scenes. After 18 years behind bars for murder, Frank Sterling is led into court one last time.
The judge says all charges are dismissed against Mr. Sterling. He is free to go. Overwhelming. It's like, wow, I get to have my life back.
He put his hands on my side of my face, and he looked at me and he said, "Sharon, I'm coming home." And I said, "Yes, you are."
Our prayers have been answered.
The judge tried to get the prosecution to admit to their wrongful conviction, and they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't say that they had convicted him wrongly. And people in the audience, I guess, kept saying to them, "Just say you were wrong. Just say you were wrong." They didn't.
Frank's first request as a free man? A good meal.
He said, "I want dinosaur barbecue." So we walked down there so that he could have dinosaur barbecue and a beer.
The ribs over at the dinosaur barbecue were the best I ever had.
You know, one of the things about Frank is that he holds no grudges against anybody, and that's truly remarkable.
For Viola Manville's family, it's a relief too. Finally, they have closure. Viola can rest in peace.
The system worked against Frank Sterling for a long time, but in the end, it was that very same system that acknowledged his mistake and unlocked the prison gates and set him free.
Justice did take a long time, but was eventually served. Mark Christie will never go free, and that's a good thing.